So let me try that once again. Let me say good evening to one and all as we welcome you back from after a couple of weeks off. Good evening to one and all.
Good evening, my brother Ruskin. Good evening, brother Reverend Kwame, and to the listeners on Talk City 91.1, also to our viewers and listeners on social media, YouTube, and Facebook. It's been quite some time. I think we probably a little bit rusty. I think it's much more than 2 weeks. It's the longest break we have taken for a long, long time during this time of the year. But we are back and we have a very packed and interesting program for you this evening. Yes, Brother Kwame.
A- Absolutely, we do. I just want to say a very pleasant good evening to you, first of all, Baba. I was joking behind the scenes, but it's really no joke at all. You're the hardest working retired professor that I know, and I'm such a big fan. Happy to know that you took night and made day. So we will be getting an Africa report tonight, which is awesome. We'll also be talking to Bongo Wisely of the All Mansions of Rastafari, by way of his, of course, most recent trip up the islands. We will talk about what island and why in a little while, so we're not going to give everything away. Of course, we'll also be talking to Her Excellency, Paramount Chief Akilah Jaramogi, of the American Association and people down there in the southern part of Trinidad. Fun fact, I actually hail from the Americans myself. I'd love to get into some of that very rich history and tapestry on tonight. But again, we start at the top of the program with a very interesting, I'm sure, Africa report. And not to be undone, made it in the nick of time is the Pan-Africanist extraordinaire brother with a smile that lights up the room. Greetings, brother Shabaka. Good to have you here with
Yes,
us on tonight. It would not have been the same if we didn't have the trio, doing our thing in our style on tonight. So I'm glad you made it. I'm glad you made it. So without further ado, again, greetings to both of you. I'm gonna hand it over to you, Shabaka, just to bring your greetings, and then you can take us right into introduce tonight's Africa report with Baba.
yeah. I think before I do that, I just want to spend. I just want to send condolences one more time tonight, since the first Indaba, to the Uzoma Wadada family on the loss of brother Kwesi. And I think I just want to comment, to make one comment. Having spent a couple of days with the sisters Akia and the family, I saw something very, very beautiful that I have to share with the country. When people lose a child under the circumstances that Zakia did, the tendency is to speak in terms of revenge. Who are these young men who would have robbed her son and ultimately took his life? How do we find them? How do we, I saw a family that prayed for members of their community, that was deeply concerned with the future of these members of their community and with the circumstances that would result in them, the challenges that would bring them to the point where they would act in that way. So I saw a level of humanity expressed at the time
Mm,
of the most grief, when people
mm,
tend to, when ideology and so on tends to disappear. You had the chairman of the Emancipation Support Committee in her home, in the midst of her grief, speaking to her love and her appreciation for the community and a desire to see everyone in the community take another step forward, including the very same young people who would have taken the lives of her children. So it was indeed
Yes,
a funeral.
yeah, that's most appropriate. I wanted to mention it just before introducing the Africa report and to invite our listeners to send their condolences during the course of the show. as well. I think Zakia would very much appreciate that. And it's also her strength, Shabaka. I told her about it more than once. There's she reminds me so much of my mother under those circumstances. A very strong woman, and she is also marshalling the forces for the African History Quiz and Spoken Word under all the circumstances. So, although we do not have Khadija here tonight, I just want to mention to the audience that the Spoken Word and the African History Quiz, those are annual events. They are on, running. Last Saturday, the quarterfinals took place. And this weekend coming, they would be shown on TTT, so look out for that. I was part of the history quiz judging, so I can tell you it was really one of the tightest competitions I saw between schools. And the spoken word, I didn't stay for it, but I heard that it was super. So you can, and we brought out reparations on in the two competitions, right? Both the African History Quiz and Spoken Word. So that team was addressed and embraced by the students. They're very eager. So the semifinals are on this Saturday. The semifinals are on. Unfortunately, I'm not in possession of the results, so I can't tell you, and I don't want to give you wrong information. I remember some of the schools, but since I cannot give you all, I won't give you any. So that's the situation with respect to what the community corner would have looked like coming out of the Emancipation Support Committee. Just a little taste of it. Khadija would have given you a lot more. Okay, so without further ado, we would go into the Africa report. It's sort of an update combined with a focus on the United Nations, Security Council in particular, and what that means for Africa, if they are included, and if they get or do not get the veto along with those seats. So that's the theme of the Africa report. Bring it up, Renee, and let's get going with it.
The most debated questions in the history of the United Nations. Why do only 5 countries have veto power over all decisions at the Security Council? For almost 80 years, they've been at the top of the food chain. China, France, Russia, the UK, and of course the United States. The world has changed since then, but the UN Security Council has not.
That was Steve Clemons of Al Jazeera. Quite a lot has happened since our mid-season recess. Coming out of Chogam, that's the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting that took place in Samoa last month.
Shirley Ayoko Botchwe, Ghana's Minister of Foreign Affairs and Regional Integration, was elected the 7th Secretary General of the Commonwealth, succeeding another woman, Baroness Patricia Scotland, Dominica-born British Conservative politician. It is the second time that Africa has held this post, but this time we hope that this appointment paves the way for the reparations fireworks that are bound to take place at the next Chogam to be held in Antigua, a Caribbean reparations stronghold, 2 years hence. Cameroon's former Prime Minister, Philemon Yang, is the new President of the United Nations General Assembly. We also note the increase in African investors in the Caribbean, the latest being Nigerian business tycoon Aisha Achimugwu, with a multi-billion-dollar investment in petroleum exploration in Grenada.
And also late last month, South Africa returned to the International Court of Justice
to file a memorial providing more facts and evidence in support of its case against Israel for genocide in Gaza. But the focus of this week's Africa report is the demand by several African governments for reform of the United Nations Security Council, that Africa be given 2 permanent seats in the Council, and that those seats come with veto power. These demands came to a head at the 79th meeting of the United Nations General Assembly,
which ended in late September.
The Security Council was instituted in 1945, the same year of the establishment of the United Nations. From inception, it has been dominated by the 5 military powers that defeated Germany and its allies in Europe, and Japan and its allies in Eastern Asia in World War II. The 5 victorious powers the United States of America, the United Kingdom, France, Russia, and China made themselves the only permanent members of the Security Council and decided that they alone would have the right to exercise veto power over decisions of the Council. Veto power means that any of the 5 members could veto or prevent a Security Council resolution, regardless of how many member states supported it. In essence, this means that these permanent members retain the right to determine whether the rest of the world live or die. The other 10 members of the Security Council are called non-permanent members, elected from 5 regions. They serve for 2 years. Africa has 3 of these seats. President William Ruto of Kenya, who is at the forefront of international intervention to secure Haiti, stressed the council is dysfunctional, undemocratic, non-inclusive, unaccountable, autocratic, and opaque. Ruto continues.
The existing international security architecture, represented by the UN Security Council, continues to hamper efforts to maintain international peace and security.
South African President Cyril Ramaphosa reminded the Assembly that Africa represented 30% of the United Nations member states and over 1.2 billion people.
78 years since its formation, the structure of the United Nations Security Council remains largely unchanged.
King Letsie III of Lesotho said,
"We advocate for a comprehensive reform of the Security Council, supporting the common African position known as the Ezulwini Consensus."
The Ezulwini Consensus is the official position of the African Union that was agreed to at Ezulwini in Eswatini since 2005. It called for reform of the United Nations, including a democratic Security Council that was more representative of the global community. Surprisingly, the biggest supporter of Africa getting 2 seats is the United States of America.
As it stands, there are currently 3 non-permanent seats on the Security Council allocated to African countries on a rotating basis for 2 years. The problem is these elected seats don't enable African countries to deliver the full benefit of their knowledge and voices to the work of the Council, to consistently lead on the challenges that affect all of us and disproportionately affect Africa. That is why, in addition to non-permanent memberships for African countries, the United States supports creating 2 permanent seats for Africa on the Council. It's what our African partners seek, and we believe this is what is just.
That's U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Greenfield. One wonders, what is America's game plan for Africa when India, Japan, Germany, and Italy are also vying for these seats when they become available? What does America expect to get from African inclusion? We should recall that half of the AU did not support America's proxy war in Ukraine. Also, South Africa wrongly rebuffed America's threats and took Israel before the International Court of Justice for genocide in Gaza. We know it is not because of America's respect for Africa or Africans. Neither is it America's fear of Africa's military potentials. After all, the only nuclear African country, South Africa, scrapped its nuclear weapons before conceding power to the ANC in 1994. One thing is certain, America will not support Africa unless it is beneficial to its long-term geopolitical and economic interest. Another thing is certain, or almost certain, is that veto power will not be extended to any other country. So, are there benefits for Africa's permanent membership on the Council, or will such membership compromise Africa's independence and rule in the global South? These questions have been engaging several African academics and political analysts.
I think that the reforms that President Ramaphosa is calling for are long overdue. Just to have Britain, China, France, and the US as permanent members and assuming that that is sufficient to solve the world's problems is myopic at best.
That's Kanye Mugabane, a political analyst of South Africa. And here she is again, speaking to a different kind of power.
One of the important things that we need to understand is that Africa is a big player. As much as financially we may have international institutions like the World Bank and the IMF still very much funding many African countries paying off that debt. But in terms of the mineral resources, the oil resources, and the many economic resources that the West comes into the continent to extract, that should show you the power that Africa has.
If only African governments could exercise complete control of those resources, no one would envy them those 2 permanent seats, and with veto power.
No veto power. We're talking effectively about a second-class membership of this exclusive club.
Yeah, I mean, no power means that the United States, despite their strong statement, are not willing to propose a systemic reform that would upend the post-World War II order. I also think that it's an important announcement because the US is the first among the permanent 5 members of the Security Council to explicitly support these 2 African seats. And as for China and Russia, it's interesting to know that even if they present themselves as the champions of the so-called Global South, they have never been so far in their promotion of African voices in the international bodies.
That was Senegalese Dr. Ramayad, director of the Atlantic Council's Africa Center.
The most strident voice was that of Dr. Chihumbol Kwao, the former African Union's ambassador to the United States.
In reference to Ambassador Greenfield's UN address, interviewer Steve Clemons of Al Jazeera asked Dr. Kwao.
Ambassador Chihumbori, let me ask you, on a scale of 1 to 10, how enthusiastic are you about the proposal that the ambassador has just made?
I think it's a step in the right direction. However, keeping in mind that this issue has been on the table, ongoing for, like you said, 80 years. If we are going to right the wrong, why can't we just right this wrong once and for all? If Africa is going to become a member of the UN Security Council, a permanent member, they must have the full rights just like the other 5 members, which means they must have veto power. Inviting Africa to the table and then asking them to remain mute. It's an insult not only to the African leaders, but it is an insult to 1.4 billion people.
Without veto power, permanent African members on the Security Council would be pressured to collaborate and connive with global imperialists, even against Africa's interests. With America's return to a right-wing regime from January next year, I anticipate that Africa's chances of gaining 2 seats will be downgraded to a remote possibility at best, and veto power even more remotely so. A few days before the US presidential elections, Nigerian Tunde Olatunji at the Africa Center posted a commentary under the title, "Regardless of the US election outcome, its Africa policy will need to be different." Time will tell if that difference will include continuing support for the 2 permanent seats at the Security Council.
Yes, so there you have it. That's the Africa report, which should have been presented since the end of the UN General Assembly. But I took advantage of updating to include the US elections, which took place a couple of weeks ago, last week before, and to project on that. So it's sort of an updated report. I kept updating. You would have heard change of voice here and there. That's because I kept, trying to keep up until such time that we resume our program. So as usual, comments from my co-hosts?
Well,
I'll kick it over to Shabaka first. Go right ahead, Shabaka.
In sort of a chronological following of the report, I would take issue with the treatment of Ruto as securing Haiti. Why did you choose to use that particular language to describe what he is involved in there? And do you believe that that is what he's doing?
Well, it's not what I believe, it's what he believes.
Very well.
I didn't critique. It wasn't a critique, really. It was a report. So if I was to critique, it would have been something else. You would notice I put up a little flyer there for you. So that's to show you reparations now. That's my idea of Haiti. Haiti demands reparations now. This is where my interest is. You know, not that he can bring security, but he might believe that. This is what they're saying. Good observation, good point. No, it's a good point, but you know, it's not what I believe. If I'm doing a critique, it would be a different kind of report.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the other thing is, Dr. Fergus, I think on this issue of reform of the Security Council, a larger question would be: should we be thinking in terms of extending veto power or ending veto power, based on how veto power has worked for the world, or is working at this time, against the interests of the global community? That's the question I would ask.
If I were to recommend, I would go the way of abolishing veto power. I think that's where the democracy might get a chance to function. So long as there's veto power, even if you extend it, we're not talking about the Democratic UN Assembly. Right. But if there's no veto power, I doubt very much the interest of these five guys going to remain vested in the United Nations for a decision-making body. I doubt very much.
Yeah, and just
they could manipulate and exploit that vote, that they have that interest in the Security Council.
Yeah, and I think just for the benefit of our listeners, those who would be just getting involved in that level of geopolitics for the first time, hearing about the Security Council and the General Assembly, trying to make sense of what we're talking about here. What we have is a situation where the vast majority, and I think, how many countries do we have in the world now? 190 something? How many countries overall? What's the latest figure?
About 192 to 200, somewhere there.
Yeah, 192, somewhere around there. Right.
It depends on who you ask.
We have difference between members and countries. Some territories are members, but
maybe not members yet. Or
no, some of them are members, but they are not considered.
But not countries.
They're not considered.
Yeah.
All right. So but we could have a situation where 190 countries, believe that a particular action is right and just, and two countries take a different position. And because one of those countries has veto power, all the countries of the world and all the peoples of the world are held to ransom. That's what the reality is today. And that's why this question of UN reform is so important. And we could give the example right now of our country, their Caribbean country to the north, Cuba. Cuba's been under a blockade now for decades. And every year that the vote comes up in the United Nations General Assembly, the vast majority of countries in the world vote for an end to the U.S. blockade of Cuba. And I think at the last vote, it was only the United States, Israel, and some satellite out in some little island out in the Pacific that voted to keep the blockade. The rest of the world, the entire world, voted to end the blockade, and we still have a blockade. And we know that our Cuban brothers and sisters are suffering. We look at the situation in Israel and Palestine, same thing. The entire world looks at it, sees a genocide, wants it to end, stop the war. A couple countries decide that they want to keep it going, and so legally it can continue under some cover of legality. I don't know to what extent that legality is foolproof, but
Yeah.
This
Okay. Those are great points. Definitely. Kwame, I will ask you to forgo further discussion.
I
And
plan to,
introduce our.
in the interest of our guest, our very
Yes,
special guest, Her
exactly.
Excellency.
Let's bring in Paramount Chief.
Absolutely.
Paramount.
I will be very happy to introduce to some and present to others a first class indigenous Maroonage movement champion, if ever there was one. I'm speaking about no less a person than Her Excellency Paramount Chief Iya, Akilah Jaramogi, that hails from the southern part of Trinidad and Tobago, well, Trinidad in particular, called Moruga. It is the birthplace of my ancestors. We are from South Trinidad and Moruga in particular. And so tonight, this very special guest is here for a number of reasons. One, to add some feminine class and touch to this otherwise all male panel. We always welcome the feminine energy. But well beyond that, her insight and her knowledge in terms of all things indigenous. But beyond that, there is a very recent event that we are hoping to probe on tonight and to learn much more about. Again, a very pleasant good night and welcome to Indaba on tonight, our very first edition after a little sabbatical of sorts. Again, greetings to you and welcome.
Modupe, Ekali, good evening, and Modupe. Thank you, and thanks to everyone who took this time to join us here to hear what we have to share and what I have to share about our gathering that took place in Trinidad last
Yes,
week.
indeed. And of course, we're talking about the second Indigenous Maroon Gathering and Academic Conference, which took place from the 5th to the 9th of November. How did it realize itself, Sister Jaramogi?
Wow, I like that term. How did it realize itself? Because it was a journey, not an easy one where you take nothing and make something. Eventually, we had to call it a gayap because it was all about lend hand. Brothers and sisters from across the diaspora coming together to make this event a success. And I give thanks to my ancestors, known and unknown. I give thanks as I shake my shak. Each seed here represents an ancestor, and without them, it would not have been possible. I give thanks for this moment, and we can look back to go forward, celebrating the second Maroon gathering. The first one was held in Dominica in 2021, answering the call of our ancestors. And many came out to answer the call. But somehow, the second Maroon gathering in Trinidad was a real revelation of the call being answered. Thank you.
Yes. So you have pioneered, you are really at the center of this work to connect Maroons and the Maroon diaspora across the region. Explain that to the listeners on the outside, what the idea is here and the thrust is of this work that you're doing.
Well, again, I give credit to my sisters throughout the Caribbean, and they started way back in 2014 when we had the gathering here in Trinidad, showcasing the American documentary in 2012, and then meeting my sister Fidelia Grand Galorn from Suriname. When she saw that documentary, she said, "You Americans are Maroons. This is a former marriage that took place in the US and you are settled here in Trinidad." But still today, a lot of Americans still cannot accept the fact that their ancestors were liberators and ran away from plantations and so on. And those who accept it are on board with us, honoring our ancestors as being liberators, freedom seekers, freedom fighters. And here we are standing tall and proud on the shoulders of our ancestors as freedom fighters. So after meeting Fidelia Grand Galorn, and talking about Maroons, we sign up an agreement, Trinidad, Suriname, and Jamaica, as Maroons of the diaspora, to work together for common good of all. And that happened in 2014. And by 2019, we was on our way to the UN, seeking Indigenous peoples' recognition. And of course, Suriname, the Shabaka people, they have been to the UN before. And the Maroons, as you grow, a lot of people would have recognized Jamaica as, Maroons. You must have passed through somewhere or the other within the education system, hearing about Maroons in Jamaica, but not about Trinidad, not about the Americans and other countries where marriage took place. So for us coming on board, I said to myself, we know about Jamaica, we know about Suriname. American story is new to the world, along with the other countries of the Caribbean and the Americas. So calling on my good professor here, Professor Claudius Fergus, I said, I need to know some more about Maroons. Then he said, Dominica is second to Jamaica in Maroon and Marinage. And he shared a paper with me. And that was where I got the inspiration to go to Dominica on a fact-finding mission just in the middle of COVID. That was 2020. And by 2021, we were there in Dominica, hosting our first conference. And following that, this is the revelation. We hosted our second conference here in Trinidad, keeping the work going and finding our Maroon brothers and sisters across the diaspora.
Yeah, and of course,
Akilah, I was there for the opening session. I want to congratulate you and your organizing team. I had in mind to ask you to elaborate on Americans and as Maroons, and Maroons as American Maroons as indigenous peoples, but you have covered that because those ideas are not in our history books. The American, there's a great work, as I mentioned, at the opening ceremony by Alvin Thompson, Flight to Freedom, where he talks about marriage all over the Americas, and there's no mention of Americans. So you have done a tremendous good for the Americans and also for Trinidad and Tobago, and putting Trinidad and Tobago and the Americans on the Maroon map of the Americas. Okay, so what I want you to tell us is the gathering that actually took place, the Maroons from the different communities around the Caribbean and beyond that were there at the conference, so we get an idea of the scope and dynamism of this conference. Give us a little bit.
Thank you. Yeah, so in our journey to find Maroons, we went into Suriname, we met the Okanisi, the Quinti, the Samaka, the Juka, the Makawai, and the Aluku. And in Jamaica, we met Charlestown, Trelawney Town, Scotts Hall, Moortown, Accompong. And we wanted to find others, right? So we went deep and we invited others to come on board. We got our sisters from Haiti to come in, Haiti. And we also had sisters from Brazil. We had rep from Dominica, Barbados, Sierra Leone. We also had from our Garifuna community in Belize. Yes, and we had from the US, different parts of the US. They were on board as well. So that was a gathering. We also had folks from Canada visiting as well. And also one sister flew in from Australia, an African sister flew in from Australia to be part of this and to share her stories, and knowledge with us. So it was a nice combination of brothers and sisters from across the diaspora coming in to share their stories and to also learn what we have been doing over the years.
Okay, let's hear from our American co-host. Huh? I'm sure you would want to chip in.
Yeah.
Wawa all the time, but Shabaka, you are the Wawa, huh?
Yeah, well, I'm interested to find out if Kwame Kamau has now discovered his Maroon roots.
No, this has been known for some time. As a matter of fact, I have both Warao and American, so perhaps I could be sitting here with some family. I don't know, but we are certainly Pan Africanists, and that's beautiful. The question I have, and it's beyond the Moruga American community. It speaks to Maroonage in general. And it's a tough question, but it's a very important one. And I think we should go there. As it speaks to autonomy, as it speaks to sovereignty, as it speaks to self governance and that ability to operate as a unique people group within a wider society. What do you think we can do within these Greenwich communities to encourage more of that? Because the greater the reliance on the external society, it seems to me that there is some erasure, and there seems to be, though perhaps not purposeful, with more and more assimilation, we see the disappearance of not only the numbers but also the relevance of why it is important to maintain these. I call them living memorials of heritage. Speak to that if you can for us.
Thank you. And for me, it's all about taking charge of your destiny and looking at what present day marriage looks like. Looking for examples of present day marriage where one can look into themselves as a sovereign person or a sovereign people. And then you ask the question, what it is to be a sovereign people. You look back to models that exist and have been uninterrupted. And one of the best models I've seen so far is certain parts in Suriname, deep in the interior, where they even refuse to speak English, and they plan the food, they govern themselves, they set up a structure where they are managing themselves. Even though you see some hiccups along the way, but at the same time, it's one of the models that we can look at. But then most of all, you look within yourself as an individual and see, how can I deem myself as a Maroon? What can I represent? How can we represent this present day marinage? Moving out of Babylon, setting up yourself in the forest, creating employment for yourself and your people, kind of governance as you look at it. And more we question this. When I go to Accompong in Jamaica, and I saw Corey trying his best to govern himself, but at the same time, he's still dependent on a government system, right? You still call out and ask the road and this and that. But to really manage yourself and see yourself as a sovereign state or a sovereign person, you have to be able to fulfill your desires. You have to be able to have your schools and your hospitals and create jobs and plenty of food, so we can say food security and not depend on importation of all the foods that are not good for us. Our spirituality, when we can take that back, African spirituality, we are not talking religion here, we are talking African spirituality. All these are part of present day marinage, when you can help govern yourself and see yourself, and live a life the way our ancestors set for us. And this is where when we talk restorative justice, restoring what was taken away, fixing and balancing ourselves the way that our ancestors deemed to live and lived years ago. Yeah.
What I'd like to find out is your pursuit of your leadership in terms of pursuing indigenous status. Is that also part of the efforts to build greater sovereignty for the community?
Well, again, seeking indigenous status was one that we kind of start crossing that hurdle, because in 2023 we had the special rapporteur visit Jamaica. And when we went to the UN seeking indigenous people status, the whole reaction to that move was, okay, indigeneity lies within yourself, how you see yourself, how you define yourself. It's no longer about territory, it's how you, the individual, see yourself. And a question was asked to me, how do you see yourself, Akilah Jaramogi? And I said, I see myself as an indigenous African Maroon woman. Then the special rapporteur, Kali Tise, said, yes, this is the answer I was looking for. It's how you live, how you exist within your community, how you embrace your African self or your indigenous self, and how you manifest it.
I'm
So
just
again,
for the benefit of our listeners, because when they hear the word indigenous, they would usually associate it with the word that is understood next to it, indigenous American. And of course, we are indigenous to the continent of Africa. So when we take on in here in the Americas this indigenous status, what does it mean and why would we want to pursue it? I just want to clarify that for our listeners, to help to clarify that, sir.
yes, thank you, because that was a big question to a lot around the Caribbean, especially with indigenous peoples. When we went into the Kalinago community, and we always pay homage to our first peoples anywhere we go, be it the Kalinago, the Tainos, the Mayans, our first peoples here in Trinidad. We often pay homage to them. At the same time, when you ask, who am I or who are you? And you can say indigenous African, that is deep within me. And that is clear.
But when you attend the United Nations Permanent Forum for Indigenous People, from what I understand, the application of the Maroons, and I think the Garifuna already do have, to some extent, a status as indigenous people. And of course, we're talking about anybody who's ever visited a Garifuna community knows we're talking about an African people here largely, even though there is some history of mixture. There's some history of mixture in the language and so on. But you're talking about a largely African community. What would be the significance of that status of given, because we're talking now about a political status, a kind of a diplomatic status, as opposed to, doesn't change anything about you genetically or where you come from, but there's a particular rights and so on associated with indigeneity in the Americas. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. And for us, while, yes, a special rapporteur visited our community, we were in Jamaica when he visited, and, we got different African Maroon groups to come to Jamaica, showcasing our life ways. He went back to the UN with his report, his finding, meeting a group of Maroon peoples who are indigenous to Africa, indigenous African Maroons. And this is where there's no doubt about us being indigenous. We don't need someone to define who we are when we ourselves can define who we are. So this question is no longer a question for me. This task is no longer a question for me or a task for me to go back to the UN seeking indigenous people status.
Yeah, well,
I think at this time we may have to switch to Bongo Grease if he's ready, huh?
All right, Akilah. I think we have to.
But I wanted to throw some. Okay, you're still there, right? Now I'm currently supervising a student whose last chapter was freedom as maroonage, a concept which was first advocated by a guy named Neil Roberts. But she's trying to argue that the migration out of the Caribbean in the early 20th century to Harlem could be conceptualized as maroonage. But I want to leave you, I wanted to engage you in that. We don't have the time. So I just want to leave you with a quote from her work. Just a short, very short quote from her work, and something that you can ponder about, and something maybe we can engage at some future time. This is what she says. Maroonage is not a vehicle that takes you to freedom, but a journey that in and of itself embodies freedom. That's one of her strong statements I take from her chapter. But there's a lot more that I think might worthy of discussion. I would have really liked to hear your views on some of these things because there are some novel ideas, in the history of migration out of the Caribbean. But thank you so much for being with us this evening, and I'm sure it wouldn't be the last time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Jaramogi.
Indeed. Very pleasant good evening. And
Yes.
so we have Bongo Greece with us, the chair.
So go ahead. Go ahead to introduce Bongo.
Absolutely. We have with us the acting chair of the All Mansions of Rastafari here on tonight. No stranger to the Indaba audience, whether on 91.1 Talk City or by way of a new audio-visual format by way of YouTube and Facebook. I want to present to some and introduce to others Glenroy Halls, aka Bongo Greece, a Rastaman extraordinaire. You have been to a Caribbean island. Oh, just bumped off. But when he returns, we want to talk about the latest in cannabis legislative reform. We want to talk about the struggle several years after, well, we can't say several, as a few years after decriminalization and the proposal of legalization. Where are we, not only in Trinidad and Tobago, but within the Caribbean with respect to this issue? Is there a sense or a feeling that the legislative reform has ended, or if not ended, added at all, had any kind of positive impact on the lives of persons who were traditionally, whether users or planters or beneficiaries of it in whatever form, whether medicine, sacramental or otherwise? And certainly with regards to that larger topic of the economics behind it, has enough been done to include what we call your legacy cannabis market into this newly reformed market? So these are all questions that we have for Bongo Greece. He's hoping that his connection will allow. Greetings to you, beloved elder Bongo Greece. Welcome to Indaba once again.
Yeah,
Well, let's
good
let
night to you.
the audience know more broadly who Bongo is. He's the acting chair of the All Mansions of Rastafari. And of course, that represents the Organization of Trinidad and Tobago. He's also on the Trinidad and Tobago National Committee of Reparations, where he represents the All Mansions of Rastafari. And he also serves on the international as international coordinator of the Nyabingi Order globally. Okay, so that is our new guest for the program. Welcome, Brother Greece.
Yeah. Welcome each and everyone to this program. Welcome all listeners. Are you hearing me?
Yes, we're hearing you well, brother.
Yes, we can.
And of course, I think we should start with the Cannabis Expo that you just returned from in St. Vincent of the Grenadines. Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay. Before I start, Shabaka, I would like to say special good night to my sister Akilah. And I also would like to remind you that the Rastafari community had signed a mutual agreement with the Maroons at the Maroons conference in Chagaramas. So we give thanks. Pertaining to the visit to St. Vincent to the first cannabis conference, the conference was held over 3 days. There were over 150 delegates, pharmacists, pharmacists, doctors, all persons interested in cannabis, physicians,
Well, he's gone again. He's having some difficulty with his internet, so
yes,
that's a problem. But I know that this conference was organized at a high government level. I know one Dr. Thompson, Gerald Thompson, was involved. He was once a parliamentarian for one of the constituencies, and he was very much behind this. So it's a high-level, high-profile conference that was organized from government level. Yes, Bongo, go ahead.
Yeah, and we were delegates of at the conference recommended by the Caribbean Fair Trade Working Group Association in Jamaica. There were 4 delegates from Trinidad and Tobago, myself, Attorney Tarek Headley, Culin Achat, Ian Bishop, and Kevin Thompson. The conference was
but you did say that the UE principal was there too. Why are you not including her as a representative?
Oh yes, Mrs. Rosemary Bell, the principal, also did a very enlightening presentation. There were also 2 other Trinidadians seeking business opportunities in St. Vincent in terms of acquiring license to enter the space in St. Vincent because of the slow pace in Trinidad and Tobago. However, there were much lessons learned from that whole cannabis experience in St. Vincent as pertaining to Trinidad and Tobago, even in terms of our decriminalization. While our decriminalization was just an ease on prohibition, St. Vincent had took it further in terms of the inclusion of the small cannabis farmers in incorporating them within their whole framework of their whole medical industry and all other aspects as the industry evolves. So there's much lessons that Trinidad can learn from St. Vincent in terms of that whole cannabis conference.
Let me ask a question if I can, really quickly. I want you to elaborate on that point before you go further. By way of inclusion, there are several ways that could be done. Special concessions in terms of cost of licenses, working with them to form cooperatives and associations so that they would give, rather than one individual, they'll give it to a corporation, an association. What model, what method did you find to be exemplary in that region that you think we can adapt here? And the part B to that is, what do you think is the rationale behind our slow pace of execution from the perspective of the economic space in Trinidad and Tobago coming into force? So part 1, what do they do that we aren't doing for the small farmers? And why do you think there is such a slow pace in terms of Trinidad and Tobago's rollout of its legal cannabis industry?
Personally, I do believe that Trinidad and Tobago is way behind and has always been way behind in terms of Trinidad and Tobago always has the concept that they don't want to set any particular trend. Decriminalization in Trinidad and Tobago was a must because all Caribbean.
Okay, he's gone again. I
Yes.
hope he gets back.
I do.
Time before Talk City signs off for us.
Yeah, but I think both Kwame and Brother Bongo, Greece, have hit upon a very important part.
Okay, he's back. He's back. So let's get him back on.
Cannabis, when you look at the cannabis decriminalization, right, is an ease on prohibition. Even towards the Rastafari movement, who has to get sacramental. They have sacramental use in terms of for the religious purpose, yet they cannot use the sacramental use for the religious purpose at a very high standard. Because when you look at it, sacrament is for the church. But if it is that you cannot have sacrament at home, so what about the Rastafari sisters who during the time of their monthly that cannot attend church service? Would they not be able to have their sacramental services home for their religious purposes? On the other hand, based on this whole concept of decriminalization, it has made room for medicinal cannabis. Medicinal cannabis simply means good agricultural practices. However, when you look at medical cannabis, it is more taken by corporations and by big people from an indoor setting. When you look at an indoor settings, it means the narrative behind the indoor setting means that the small farmer does not have a chance to get in because of the high quality standard set at the indoor. Where the truth and in fact, because of the climatic conditions in the Caribbean, we have a better nature for growing cannabis outdoors. So there are pros and cons and complexities, especially under the American system. because though cannabis is decriminalized, it is still illegal. It is just decriminalized in small amounts for usage in small amounts. So you find in America, you can grow a tomato tree in America, but if you grow the same tomato in Trinidad, you cannot export it. So cannabis in America is under the state level, you can sell it, you can do what you have to do, different companies. Under the national level, it is illegal on the federal level. So there are a number of stipulations in terms of cannabis in moving the whole concept forward. So the only concept for the Caribbean is for us to come together regionally as a Caribbean and produce our local cannabis. Because at the end of the day, what we are getting from North America, these North American and EU people have their whole system set. We today cannot that. St. Vincent, on the other hand, they are certified, internationally certified. You know, the standards of Bureau, everybody in St. Vincent is within the medical facility. Everybody is within the whole framework of
Bongo,
advancing.
Bongo, I want you to talk about the downstreaming of products. A lot of those products were on display in St. Vincent. I wanted to address that before we reach the top of the hour. And tell us the extent to which those might have been made in St. Vincent products or products that they brought in. How many of those were made in St. Vincent products?
No. We had two of the medical facilities in
Oh, he's gone again.
Oh, we lost him again. Again, that whole question of how did they include the legacy market? Because he's in and out, sometimes he may lose the trend of thought in terms of some of the questions that were asked previously. But in addition to the downstream products, which is a brilliant question, and to what extent are the local Vincies, to use that term, participating in that downstream production? Is that their recipe for success? Beyond just grow, the downstream industries, the cottage industry, so to speak, and the allowance for persons to participate in that without perhaps not much cost and or stringent policies that would otherwise create barriers to entry. I would love to know more about that. Here's hoping that his internet access gives allowance. Another question that I would want for him to deal with at some point is this sense of beyond inclusion and support from a government perspective, whether or not from a historic perspective, the persons coming in from the US and or Europe to partner with regional growers, whether or not that has played out in the interests of the locals. I have intel that suggests that it is not. And in many instances, I know one instance in Jamaica, they took their strains, they took it abroad, they are now producing it abroad, and they have eliminated some of their local production because they are able to do it by way of indoor grow externally. And so there are matters like that that I would absolutely want for him to chime in on. We have 1 minute left.
Yeah, let's say good night to Ruskin at the studio and to the listeners on Talk
The
City.
audience.
And we apologize for the lapses in the internet. We had a very good discussion going. We apologize for that. Yeah, so see you again next week at the same time on 91.1 FM. Good night to the listeners on that station. Shabaka, I think you want to chip in.
Yeah, well, I think that this raises well, we have our brother back. I will wait until.
Yeah, quickly, the downstream products, Bongo, were they made in St. Vincent to what extent? Could you address that?
We have attended a cannabis laboratory, a dispensary, where all the cannabis products, the THC products is blue, the CBD products is green. The hygienic standards, all the different standards, all the machine, they make the THC oil as a base, that is for all others. However, we were also informed that if you, persons who over excessive amount of THC, it actually causes a stress on the body. However, they combine it with mango terpenes. So it was explained that if you're having a spliff, which is of a high THC, and you use a
Oh, he's gone again. He's gone again. I
That's really
think.
unfortunate there because you were getting some.
Let's hear from the audience if we can. There's a lot of audience commentary. We usually keep it for the very last. But if there's anything at all from the audience that we can pull, that would be excellent. I'm seeing someone saying that we are ready for a cannabis wellness and health expo right here in Trinidad, and that person goes by the I guess the appellation of Y, just Y in parenthesis. Ras Maroon healing and sending a love. Michael Paul Brown also sending love as well. Hugh Lawrence also sending, and Michael Paul Brown, I think this brother's out of Jamaica. One of those Maroon brothers out of Jamaica as well, which is brilliant. Hugh Lawrence sending greetings as well as Abantum Uwa, number 2, sending again greetings. Hugh Lawrence makes the point, and that is to the issue of maroonage, as it were. I not actually, I self-correct. It is to the issue of the Security Council, and he said it has become a toothless bulldog, especially in terms of what's happening in the Gaza, Lebanon, West Bank experience. How relevant is it in today's reality? Perhaps one of you could respond to him with regards to that. Others sending love and light from Bahamas, Prophet Honorable Jamiki, rising and settings, Royal Indaba family. And of course, we have Sister Deborah E. Walters out of Connecticut, always tuned in. Very, very, very loyal listener. So the question is the Security Council a toothless bulldog? Shabaka, that's a question, perhaps a statement question coming from one of our loyal listeners. Do you care to address that? Is it a case of toothlessness? Or is it a case
It's
of...
not exactly toothless, but at least all the teeth are not there.
Well, I would actually take it from a different angle. I would say that the problem with the Security Council that it is that it has plenty teeth.
Too much teeth. Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Go right ahead.
And of course, the rest of the global community is diminished next to it, and of course that is the problem that we're having right now.
But a follow-up question to that is the Security Council lack of response to be blamed for what's happening with our brothers and sisters in Gaza, Lebanon, et al., or is it as a result of...
It's the result of the Security Council, the way they are formulated, and the power that it gives to the people who want to see that particular situation prosecuted in the way that it is being done right now. They are at the center of the Security Council, and it doesn't...
Yeah, I think we can expand that to Haiti, Sudan, a number of other places where the Security Council seem to take a sort of pro-American, pro-NATO position on a number of these things and simply sanction. In a sense, they're rubber stamping the traditional imperialist interventions in these places. Quite often, I think that is what is happening.
Yeah, there's a school of thought in international relations that is at the epicenter of the problems that the world is facing right now. The way that UN Council is constituted, and of course, it also, because people don't quite understand how the UN system works. It also creates a lot of antipathy towards the entire UN system when it can't seem to stop injustices.
I think the latest example on that, Shabaka, is the attempt by, well, not attempt exactly, but the success of the US, Israel, Germany, and so on in subverting the ICC just to defend Netanyahu and the former Minister of Defense, so they would subvert the entire court simply to protect these guys, and that's the kind of thing that happened. Once it does not work for them, they do not mind in a sense undermining the system, dismantling it, and corrupting it and so on. That is how they operate. It's my way or no way.
Yes, I think, for the benefit of our listeners, Dr. Fergus is actually alluding to the fact that the entire infrastructure of global governance is being destroyed at the moment as we speak. We don't know, it's being disfigured in such a way, we just don't know what it will look like at the end of this particular conference, because institutions that were being built, that were in constructions, are being destroyed so that certain injustices, now in particular the the genocide in Palestine, could continue.
So isn't it ironic then, therefore, that you have some arms of the UN that would call certain countries illegal occupations by way of their court system, and then on the other hand, at the stroke of a pen, one country can veto any action that is perhaps recommended by way of a resolution or motion to stop any atrocities from taking place. So on the one hand, you have a court saying maybe an individual should be arrested for war crimes, and or an entire country is illegal by way of its status. But then on the other hand, you have a Security Council that has that kind of power that can veto that. Which arm should we listen to? Should we listen to the court, or should we listen to the council?
Of operation, I think we need to understand that. The UN General Assembly, you can have resolutions passed and not supported even by the United States and so on, right? For example, what easily comes to mind is the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples passed in 2007. The United States didn't support it. Canada didn't support it. Australia didn't support it. They came on board after. But they had been blocking it since 1992. Eventually, it passed. So that kind of thing happened. But if it went to the Security Council for ratification, there's where they are going to exercise their veto. At least one of those four had veto power, and that's the United States. So they would have been able to veto it there. But not all resolutions go to the Security Council.
Absolutely. Only security matters would go there. But again, because the issue in Palestine is indeed a security issue, that one arm of the UN is saying that it's an illegal state. But then other arms, as it relates to security, allows for continued atrocities based on the reporting that is coming out of certain camps, independent journalists, etc. It really begs the question, why have a Security Council at all? Whose interest is that serving? And per what was discussed earlier today, maybe its total dismantling is only the way to go, because bringing on more persons really just adds to the elite club, whether or not you give them veto power. It's really a few having more say, more power, more vote than others. It's going to be interesting how that plays out.
But the financing is another factor we have not talked about. I see the financing of the United Nations. About 40% of the financing comes from the United States. So that is the stranglehold they also have. And we remember the last Trump regime. I think they withdrew funding from, I think is one of those organizations that they felt wasn't following up on.
It was
UNICEF, they withdrew funding. So that's the kind of power they have, power of the dollar, power of financing as well, because the UN cannot operate without mega funding. A lot of these agencies they have heavily dependent on the United States. So that is one of the problems we have.
I also want to come back to the cannabis conversation for a minute.
Yeah.
Because, it seems to me that Trinidad is at an interesting point in these progressive conversations. So wherever you have the Trinidadian state taking a position that we could say is progressive, there seems to be a reticence to take it to where it should go. There seems to be within the infrastructure of power a large enough community to say that the most minor and superficial transformation is enough, and not to allow these progressive changes to really have the impact that they should. And I could think of several right off the top of my head. You just take, for example, the recent change that the PNM government took around the question of hair, and the fact that the government doesn't seem capable of seeing the issue through. And perhaps even from the rumblings that I hear, there are people within the power structure, within the political elite, that may want to reverse the issue. They think that it has already gone too far. So rather than having a situation where, as other countries like the United Kingdom and the United States have done, where the people, the activists, the people who have been victims of the struggle, the academics and so on, are involved in the rollout of the transformative legislation, you have a situation where the politicians here in Trinidad make a decision, they exclude a large part of the stakeholders, the important stakeholders in the process, and then they refuse to engage in the education necessary to see the transformation through in a really positive direction. And so you still have children being discriminated against in schools in all kinds of ways, and you have a large part of the community who doesn't understand the issue, readying themselves to roll back the legislation. And you see the same thing with cannabis. You see the same thing with right across the board. The political elite seems challenged to really make a genuine step, a proper step in the right direction.
I have a question for you, and perhaps Baba as well. And that's the very important question as to why. The what and the how we know, but the why. And I'm asking, to what extent does money and money interests impact upon these decisions? And to what extent does religion, and in particular Western religion, factor into a lot of these discourses and decisions that are taken or not taken? What is the why behind it? Of course, it's speculative, but it's a very important question.
I think it's a question of political culture in Trinidad. You have the same religion and the same other factors you talk about across the Caribbean. But if you look at Trinidad's response to a number of things, let's say the rollout of CFC gases, Trinidad was the last to prevent it, right? If you look at plastics, many of those countries in the Caribbean, you would not find plastics and people putting food in these, what do you call these containers? Yeah, it's banned. But in Trinidad,
but again, is it money interest? Again, that is a typical, that you made my point, I think, because of the islands, they don't have manufacturing. Of the islands, they don't have mega manufacturing. In Trinidad, you actually have companies producing some of these things. So the question is big money having a part to play?
Was when we were preparing for World Cup 2007, Trinidad was the last to submit, their proposal, where we ended up, I think, with something they call the brown paper bag package or something like that, right? But you know the worst. So we have had that track record. I think it's part of the political culture in responding to certain kind of developments. But because the government is very quick to act on certain other issues, I don't think.
What I'm saying is that even when the government acts, it does not act in a manner that is thorough. It does, it's
minimalist.
It feels like if it cannot stand its ground in a particular reactionary position any longer, it will take that step. It will announce that step, but it will not take it to where it needs to go for the transformation to be really meaningful. And this
put a pin on that. Empress Q is chiding in, and she was at the conference. She's saying Empress Q here. So Empress Q is the why. And Empress Q is saying, why in parenthesis, we did not see many downstream products concerning the cannabis conference held recently in St. Vincent, which should be a main way of legal business for the traditional farmer. government should support exporting locally made infused products. And that leads me to a question. And that question is, if we do not have a uniformed regional cannabis market, which is what Principal Rosemary Bell Antoine, this very prolific legal luminary who was a chair behind that amazing regional study, CARICOM Commission study, proposed that we should do. Have a uniform regional approach so that there is a standardization in terms of what is medical, or what is therapeutic, what is sacramental, what is personal use, what is industrial. But absent that, what might be legal in Trinidad might be very illegal in Jamaica and very legal in St. Vincent the Grenadines. So
I think St. Vincent, Trinidad is good to compare because you can grow your 4 trees in Trinidad, but even now with all that is taking place in St. Vincent, you would be charged if you're growing a single tree, if you're caught growing a single tree. So while they have decriminalized for medical purposes, they have regulated the thing, but you cannot simply grow marijuana freely, let's say in your backyard or in some flower pot or something. Right?
I find that
you can't go beyond that because you can't even walk the street with it. You grow it and you can be charged for illegally trading and drugs and so on if you're walking the street with your own plants. So, so that's the kind of problem we have. You stop there. Shabaka is rightly identified that you take a position, but you don't want to go further than that. There's a sort of a block, a political block to go further than that, whether it's political.
But who are the gatekeepers? That's a very important question. Number one.
Maybe that's a question for another night. I think
of
we
course.
have reached the limit. We should be saying good night now. Bongo is not coming back, obviously. And I think Renee might be waiting on us to wrap up. So I think we should do that now.
Yes.
So is there anyone else to recognize in the chat, or should we just say good night? See you next
Oh, yes, there are a couple of persons to recognize. Again, we want to thank Empress Q for chiming in on a very important matter, gracing us with your presence on tonight. Thank you so much. There's also Jami Lukman as well, healing us and greeting us with Black Power. A very extraordinary Pan-Africanist brother that does some amazing work that I perhaps would one day want to have on the program. Thank you everyone for tuning in and for listening in, and certainly for your comments. Again, a very diverse audience, this Indaba family. Please tell a friend to tell a friend. We are on Facebook. We are on YouTube. For those in Trinidad and Tobago, we are live on 91.1 FM, but that's up until 9 p.m. Trinidad time. Beyond that, if you want to join us on Indaba Overtime, of course, you're going to have to join us by way of the social media. Tonight, we looked at the Africa report dealing with the whole issue of the Security Council and Africa's inclusion therein and the controversy surrounding it. We also looked at Maroon, and we had our special guest on tonight, Her Excellency, now Paramount Chief Akilah Jaramogi, on the program. We also had greeting us by way of and hailing us by way of All Mansions of Rastafari, its chair and multiple hat wearing, again, Pan-Africanist and activist in Trinidad, Bongo wisely, coming out of his most recent trip to St. Vincent, dealing with this very important cannabis conference there. There was not enough time to go into any one of these topics, so you know that you'll be able to hear much more as we unpack these issues live right here on Indaba. I want to thank our brother Shabaka Kambon for being the brilliant activist that he is, for the hardest working retired professor of all time, not just Trinidad, all time, in the extraordinary Baba Dr. Claudius Fergus and his amazing contributions to what we do nightly. That being said, we are not out of love, faith, or words, but for tonight, we are out of time, and I want to bid everyone a very pleasant good evening and good night for now.
And thanks to Renee in the background as well.
Okay, good night.
Good.